My advice to founders who are thinking about going through a sale of the company is find the expertise, find it early, start working with them early.
Alex Sandkuhl is the former VP of Sales of InSync Healthcare Solutions, where he successfully built a company from $6 million of revenue to $39 million of revenue and $10 million of EBITDA.
I joined InSync in 2017, myself and the other partners. We made the joint decision. We have got to take control of our own destiny.
Your team had hired us 2 years in advance, right? We had done a lot of work together leading up to the transaction.
A concept that you and Zach brought to the table, which became our mantra, was we need to reverse engineer the outcome. And we need to focus on how do we maximize our valuation, knowing what type of metrics buyers are going to want to see, and being able to institute the operational change in advance so that we could collect the correct data was a huge benefit of having you involved earlier rather than later. Time is money, especially in a process like this. Helping us focus on what was actually going to move the needle, who's raising capital, who's buying, who's getting bought. That was information that we just simply didn't have access to. Going back to the journey in 2017 where it started and looking at how far we came. Plenty of founders or executives that are a part of these journeys, they're going to feel that as well. All this comes down to the closing call.
Alex, welcome to the pod. Thanks for joining us. For all those listening, Alex Sandkuhl is the former VP of Sales of InSync Healthcare Solutions, where he successfully built a company from $6 million of revenue to $39 million of revenue and $10 million of EBITDA, exiting the year with 50% growth. We're thrilled to have you on the pod. Would love to just start with, Alex, bring us back to the very beginning of InSync. What were some of the early challenges that you faced? We're excited to hear.
Wow. Happy to be here, Shane. Thanks for the illustrious intro. I appreciate that. Always good every once in a while to take a look in the rear view. Going back to the good old days when we just got started. I mean, I joined InSync in 2017, and as you had mentioned, they had about $6 million of legacy revenue. And what I saw though was they had a phenomenal product, a pretty decent implementation process, but not really a direct outbound sales motion or really any type of go-to-market dedicated strategy. So, look, to my benefit, I kind of had I feel a dragster sitting on the starting line waiting for somebody to just come in and push the gas pedal. And that's what they brought me in to do. Originally when I had came in, they were spending about $30,000 a month on software advice leads. That's where all of these leads and opportunities were coming from. And we made the joint decision, myself and the other partners, that, look, we have got to take control of our own destiny. And that meant putting in and really implementing a direct sales model. So at that point, 2017, the concept of a SDR or BDR, still, you had the lines blurred with a telemarketer. My first really big initiative was, look, I want to take the concept of what's called a business development representative. Let's have 2 of them, and let's just see what I can generate in the first 90 days. Okay, and then we'll go from there. So had our first 2 BDRs, and then myself, I was selling alongside the reps. And I think really in the first 30 days, we added like $300,000 to the pipeline in qualified opportunities. And within that first 90 days, we closed, several $100,000 worth of business. So we were like, okay, this is working. So we took that and we doubled down on it, right? And this is really, this built the foundation of our model from a direct sales and an outbound sales motion, which was a BDR team feeding into an account executive team. Now, I think what's interesting, looking back, all these years to 2017, and where we were sourcing the leads and opportunities. Again, during that 90 days, I mean, you might as well just take the virtual phone book and open it up, because we were just, having the BDRs go to Google and just Google a whole bunch of medical practices. We were selling to really small to mid-market behavioral health organizations. But, that was my first aha moment, is any time that those BDRs are not spending having quality conversations with our ICP is time wasted and it's money wasted. That was my first big moment of, okay, we have got to figure out how do we have our BDRs focus on what we want their ideal job to do, which is not qualifying leads, which is not scraping and pulling data. It's having conversations. It's driving top of funnel through booking demonstrations. I think that's where we started to get a little bit more sophisticated around scraping some data from online database. I mean, heck, in the early days, I would just go to Fiverr.com. I would scrape an online database, pull it in. But again, as the months rolled on, we implemented our first CRM. We pulled in HubSpot. We had some additional AEs that came up through the ranks through these BDRs. We designed and taught the product demos, refined the pricing and contracts. And ultimately, we were funding all this growth. As you had mentioned, not through any outside source of funds. We were selling perpetual licenses, and we would sell a 5-year deal. We'd pre-fund that contract using financing partners, and that was really the capital that I needed to continue to grow and scale the business as well as the go-to-market team. That came from, again, that source of financed perpetual licenses, which we eventually converted to a subscription later. But, it's like I said, it's in the early days, it's grabbing and scraping for whatever we could, but you could start to see the little kernels of a truly refined go-to-market and direct sales motion come through these little aha moments, and then you fast forward down the line, and it looks like a completely different beast. By the time we sold the business in 21.
Although it seems quite primitive, some of the motions that you had in place during the good old days. Once we started to get involved, and we were evaluating the various different suitors that were interested in acquisition of InSync, whether it be private equity or strategic, many of them were astonished at how impressive the go-to-market function was, how quickly you were scaling new revenue over time within your ideal customer personas. And so I think, although folks might find that a little bit primitive early on, it's really what does it evolve into and how do you get to that point along the journey? And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about some of the inflection points of the sales team and how you thought about scaling that BDR program and
Yep.
really what were some of the key factors that led to that multi-strategy BDR program that you had when we got involved.
Well, I think you have to start at the fuel source. I think of a go-to-market motion or a direct sales team. I think about it as a sales engine, right? You have different components of the engine. The engine could be the most powerful engine in the world. It doesn't go anywhere if you don't have any fuel. So you really start with the TAM, or you could call it your SAM, the service addressable market. Do you have enough TAM or SAM to support this, powerful engine that you might be building out on the go-to-market side? So that's the way we started thinking about TAM equals the leads equals the fuel. And what we ended up doing is really designing this sales engine, and we would look at the TAM or the leads that we were pulling in. First of all, how much was out there, right? If this was a certain segment of the behavioral health market, or maybe it was segmented by provider size, there's different ways that we segmented those. What we eventually led into was having different engines for different markets. And each one of these engines had its own unit of lead qualifiers, BDRs, and account executives around it. So we had a dedicated fuel source of TAM or SAM for that specific engine. We had, you could call them mechanics, right? You have a specialized mechanic that works on a, electric power engine versus a gasoline powered engine. Well, we had specialized BDRs, lead qualifiers, and account executives that worked on one engine that serviced one portion of the market. So it was this tight knit group. And I think, looking at our company and how it began to grow, that concept of scaling small teams or engines as a whole based on a specific market segment, I think that was a big part of our success, a big key to the success. I think an element when we think back on 2018, so a year after we kind of got out of the Stone Age in 2017, I think one of the biggest inflection points we made was demand generation and lead qualification, right? In this concept of taking lead qualification, which today, we do a lot through technology and things of that nature. But back then I said, okay, going back to the BDRs, we've got enough TAM, we've got enough SAM. How do we have those BDRs not spending time on leads or opportunities that are the wrong number, the wrong practice, it's outside of the market size that they're supposed to be working on? So what we did is we brought in very junior individuals who wanted to eventually scale into a BDR, and we called them lead qualifiers. And their whole job and purpose was to set as a layer. Prior to coming into the BDRs, they would be the first pass at these opportunities. So they would be making the first calls into these phone numbers, into these practices. One, is it the right practice? Okay, let's start there. Is this even the right phone number to the right business? Number two, who is the office manager, which a lot of times was the call point that we were calling into. Who is the office manager? Is he or she still there? And then maybe what software they're using, right? Some rudimentary lead qualification. So that way, when the BDRs receive this bucket of leads, which we had a pretty advanced as we started to grow through the company, all this routing through based on lead scoring metrics through our CRM. But as that BDR sits down on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock after our 8:30 meeting that we had every single morning to review market analysis and all this kind of fun stuff, they click go, right? And they're making their dials into pre-qualified leads and opportunities. And that's where we just saw, the massive uptick in productivity, demos being scheduled, and also helping to reduce burnout with the BDRs, right? Because they're not sifting through a bunch of bad data. That's already been done before them. So again, instituting that layer of lead qualification prior to the BDRs or your SDR teams, that was massive. So by 2018, we had that demand generation in lead qualification teams, which ultimately reduced our dependence on the paid leads, and it also lowered our customer acquisition cost. We had those market-specific BDRs and AE teams, which ultimately increased our close ratios and annual contract values because they were completely dialed in on the market that they were serviced. They were lethal at it. We had sales operations, which is where we get into the CRM and the actual function of pulling the data, scraping the data, which this was still early days even for like something like Zoom Info, which didn't have a lot of the medical practice data. So we were still highly dependent on finding an NPI database and scraping that data. So all that pulling in through sales operations made us a lot more efficient, made that data a lot more actionable. And then ultimately customer success, right? It's no good if you sell a whole bunch of contracts, you can't service them. So, bringing in that customer success to improve retention and then also increase our expansion revenue. That was 2018. So a big difference in 2018 from where we were in 2017. So that, 12 months, I would say that was the formative years of the InSync journey. And then that looked, vastly different in 2021, just doubling down on all those. But that was even just a year's difference made a massive change and inflection in the company.
I will say we were quite impressed with the accountability that you all had within your sales organization. I remember looking at the weekly reports on cold calls had, meetings logged. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about accountability that you were able to breed within the team that became the InSync sales engine.
Sure. I would say, look, in sales, behavior is always driven by comp, right? There's a reason that somebody gets into sales and they're driven by a comp plan. So that's I think 50% of the equation. I know most people would say, well, that would be 90 to 100%. I think culture was another part of that, which that's a buzzword that gets tossed around. But I think there was a few key aspects to it. Number one, when you think about comp, let's tackle that first, right? Just from the financial logistics of motivating and keeping a sales team, a go-to-market team accountable. We based our comp plan monthly, every month. So every single month, our compensation structure was based on every month was like the Super Bowl. Every single month was end of the quarter. Every single month was end of the year. And we had leaderboards for each month. Everything was centered around that. So what do you have? That means that you've got roughly 20 working days where people are just going full tilt. The pedal is pushed all the way to the floor. There's excitement, there's energy, the stakes are high. And at the end, there's going to be some winners, and I think that aspect, it just brought a level of energy, enthusiasm when I think combined with a comp plan that reflected that and mirrored that, I think that's where you had a recipe for accountability. I think that aspect and the fact that our entire sales team, we met every single day, twice a day. And it wasn't a meeting just to have a meeting. Every day we got in there at 8:30, we met for 30 minutes. Every day was structured differently. Mondays, we talked about, maybe we review a product feature. The next day, we would review a competitor. Every Friday, we were looking at the week's results. Every afternoon, we met for 15 minutes and we looked at the results from that day. So, there's no loafing any day or any month because there's that excitement, that energy of, hey, we've got accountability. Every single day counts. And I think that came more into the culture aspect and very much the rising tide lifts all boats. Because when one person would find out, oh, you know what, our competitor, they just had an outage, they're not going to keep that to themselves because we had team aspects in there too. They let everybody know. And then before you know it, you've got 25, 30 people on the phone dialing into that competitor from our CRM, calling all their customers. And, oh, we just had to, happen to catch them at the time when they're the most vulnerable. And that's, that's how we just, it was the energy, the lethality of the sales team, I think ultimately bred very much this self-sustainability and the accountability, which, helped us become very successful.
Well, when I came to visit several times on campus, I will call it the InSync campus, given the multiple different buildings that you had, that sales energy was infectious. And it was something where I looked to my left and said, hey, Zach, we got to replicate this environment because it's quite compelling to see everyone high-fiving, thrilled to get off a call, pushing the ball downfield after every single meeting. So very, very impressive. And when we think about not only accountability, but also the hygiene that you had within your CRM, it was actually quite impressive. We look at a lot of different businesses. You had impressive hygiene, impressive logging of, industry type, provider count, ways in which we could slice and dice the data. And I know from a hygiene perspective, your team had hired us 2 years in advance, right? We had done a lot of work together leading up to the transaction. So maybe you can share a little bit about some of the hygiene or the initiatives that we took as a team leading up to the ultimate transaction for InSync.
Well, I think, a concept that you and Zach brought to the table, which became our mantra, right, during those 2 years was we need to reverse engineer the outcome. And we need to focus on how do we maximize our valuation, but let's make sure that we give ourselves enough time to do that, to execute on it. So I would say from a standpoint of our engagement with you and Zach, I put things into two different buckets. I put something into an operational bucket. So operationally, financial and the operating model, huge lift, and being able, like you were talking about, we had great hygiene, we had all these great numbers and metrics. Well, how do we tell that story? And being able to tell that through a refined financial and operating model that you helped us with was massive. Better accounting practices. I think we had some unique challenges with the way that we were financing contracts, which worked phenomenal. But most of the buyers in the market had not been exposed or seen that type of financing strategy. So being able to tell our unique story through the accounting aspects and the work that you did there was huge. Our data, we had excellent HubSpot data, excellent Acumatica data, but they weren't always talking. So, going through there and rectifying and matching a lot of the things that we were doing, that was a huge lift. I know that was a massive amount of data. And then overall, operationally, I put, better reporting, but reporting in the sense of, again, going back to our mantra, reverse engineering that outcome, knowing what type of metrics buyers are going to want to see, and being able to institute the operational change in advance so that we could collect the correct data was a huge benefit of having you involved earlier rather than later. And that afforded us the time to go and execute on that. So at the end, we had phenomenal metrics and reports that we were able to produce when we went through, into the final stage of the process. Strategically, bucket number 2, competitive intelligence. I think that, it was different intelligence than the type that we were gathering just being on the front lines with our go-to-market and sales and, all the things that we were doing. Yours was from a market perspective. Who's raising capital? Who's buying? Who's getting bought? That was information that we just simply didn't have access to, and I think it helped us inform our overall market strategy. And it helped us position ourselves, in my mind, another huge strategic move that we made with you and Zach was we were able to position ourselves as both a platform sale and a strategic acquisition target. And obviously that helped us expand our pool of buyers and get on a lot more radars. So again, reverse engineering that outcome and helping us focus on what was actually going to move the needle so that we don't waste time on things that are not. Time is money, especially in a process like this. That was fundamental to running a very organized and ultimately successful process.
And with 19 different bidders, and suitors interested in InSync, where it was coming from folks that were down market from a provider count from InSync, those that were up market like Qualifacts, from InSync and even just platform private equity, it was important to actually be able to tell different stories together on where the fit could be, where the synergies lie. And you were extremely instrumental within that storytelling because you were on the front line of building the sales engine that everyone was excited to honestly acquire or merge with. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what was your experience working with some of those suitors that were interested in, if we were able to bring the InSync magic, that sales engine in-house, how could we effectuate growth overall, from any one suitor?
Well, I think we talked about 2018. Let's talk about InSync, the year that we eventually were acquired, 2021. By that time, what bidders and buyers were looking at is we had bootstrapped a multi-product, multi-market sales machine like you talked about. We had since expanded from SMB into enterprise for-profit, nonprofit, and government customers. We had 50% growth that you had mentioned. Ultimately, we ended before acquisition with 23 BDRs, 14 AEs. But at the same time, we simultaneously reduced our customer acquisition cost by 274%. So we went from $2,194 to $800 in customer acquisition. And we also increased our gross margins from 48 to 77%. And I think efficiency was the key. I mean, that when you look at the result of the growth efficiency and the fact that we increased our EBITDA from -3 to 25% and generated a $9.4 million profit in 2021, they want to know how we do it, right? How do you do this, and how can we bring these concepts into the new organization? So I think the sales efficiency was one of the big highlights that they looked at and said, for example, with Qualifacts, which was a phenomenal partner that we ended up, becoming a part of their family. Qualifacts was and still is an absolutely dominant force in the enterprise, nonprofit, and government behavioral health organizations. They had some for-profit as well. But for someone like us, they looked at this and said, hey, this is an opportunity for us to expand the spectrum of our reach in behavioral health, because now we can tap into this incredibly efficient sales machine, swim both sides, right? Go up market and down market, and really attack the mid market and for profit. Because you think about it, I mean, in community behavioral health, you might have somebody that's right down the street. Maybe there's a community behavioral health agency, and 2 blocks away, there's a for-profit agency that maybe has 25 providers. That's an ecosystem. And for someone like Qualifacts, that gave them the opportunity to tap into that ecosystem, while also looking at this and saying, hey, we've got a plug-and-play sales engine or a solution. And also, from a headcount perspective, because we had those layers of lead qualifiers, BDRs, AEs, it also created this upward mobility where we were able to retain a lot of talent because we had different pathways. You start as lead qualifier, move into BDR and AE, but not just that. There's different markets. Maybe you start as a BDR in the smallest behavioral health segment, and then you move into a BDR in a larger segment. Same thing, you maybe move into an AE position, fantastic. You start in a smaller market, you move your way up. So for a larger enterprise company like Qualifacts, that just expanded that growth ladder even more for employees, because now they could start at they're working as a BDR, 10 to 20 provider behavioral health clinics, but they're looking at this guy, maybe at some point they could reach all the way up into, the enterprise account executive position, working on nonprofit behavioral health agencies. So I think, again, there was that dual benefit, that symbiosis between attacking the entire behavioral health market as a whole, but also retaining employees by showing a full upward trajectory through the entire behavioral health ecosystem from a software provider standpoint. I mean, I think those were some of the dual benefits, right, that both sides of the equation ultimately came away with.
Absolutely. And I think, ultimately the merger between InSync and Qualifacts, backed by Warburg Pincus, established the dominant player in the for-profit and non-for-profit community behavioral health segments, really ranging from, call it 10 providers to 300 plus providers. So it's pretty impressive to see what you all have been able to build. even post-transaction. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about, what was life like after the deal? You had established this multi-layer, multi-strategy, BDR through AE program at InSync. What was it like merging with a whole different go-to-market model and, organizational structure?
Sure. Well, Qualifacts the year before had previously merged with another company. So there was another acquisition that happened. So effectively, what we had was a sales team that had just came together previous to our acquisition. And now we essentially had three different products. So my main job was to figure out how do we get all three products, all three teams is play in the same sandbox, right, and get along. I mean, that's just part of an acquisition like this. But I think, again, one of the things I think we had to figure out early is how do we stay in the lane, right? What did each product and each team know and do really well that would contribute to the ultimate mission of making Qualifacts the number one player in behavioral health as a whole? So I think, post-acquisition, the first really 90 days was about, number one, how do we not lose speed on either side, right? We can't let it dip here just because we've had significant acquisition. So keeping my team focused on the job at hand and focused on executing on the pipeline that they had spent building. And at the same time, looking at how do we start to integrate not just the teams from an operational standpoint. We had two different CRMs, we had different tech stacks, right? We had all that we had to unpack. But also, what teams are going after which markets. So ultimately, I would say the biggest project that I worked on post-acquisition, besides just team integration, was part of a larger LRP, a long-range plan. And how do we take all of these products, these headcount, everything, how do we put that together and we find one direct initiative that everybody can get behind and stay in their lanes. And that was part of the massive LRP that I'm very proud of the work that we did on that long range plan because, it was very involved. We had to figure out how do we squeeze this orange for the most juice? And so that means how do we get the most out of every team without alienating other people that are involved? So, again, I would say post-acquisition was about, number one, making sure we don't lose steam on either side of the ball and that both teams are executing on the existing siloed pipelines. And then by the end of that year, bringing those pipelines together underneath an umbrella of a long-range plan, that was the main thing that we had to focus on.
Now, having seen the movie before, are there any, recommendations you would give founders that are going through this process of evaluating the right partner and thinking through, post-transaction life? What recommendations would you have?
I think, again, working with you and Zach early in the process, I had mentioned, that helped us reverse engineer the outcome that we wanted and afforded us enough time to execute on those initiatives that we identified. I mean, we had existing interest from private equity prior to hiring a banker. But I think running that process with you and Zach, we ended up receiving 19 term sheets. We had 9 investors that really dug into the commercial diligence streams. You guys were on site twice, and we ultimately found our perfect partner with Qualifacts. So my advice to founders who are thinking about going through a significant either capital raise or potential majority sale of the company is find the expertise. Find it early, start working with them early. So again, I would highly recommend you and Zach for a process like that. But again, what you don't want to do is get the ball all the way down at the 5-yard line and wish you actually had a few downs beforehand. You're back on the 50 because you'd like to change a few things. It's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot harder, to back the train back up the track. So get in with expertise early. And then again, identify what are the things that are going to move the needle the most? Focus on those. Reverse engineer your outcome. That would be my biggest advice to founders who are thinking about or starting to go through that process. Post acquisition, I think it's look. You're bringing two companies together. You're bringing two sets of cultures together. Take the rose-colored glasses off. There is going to be some challenge there, but I think focusing on the things that at least I thought worked for us, keeping people in their lanes where it counts so you don't lose momentum in the very beginning. That first 90 days, so crucial that you don't lose traction in the market, but also you want to increase the speed at which your integration is happening internally in the organizations. And focus on how do you get everybody moving in the right direction, rowing in the right direction under that broader LRP, that long range plan. Those are the things to focus on. Everything else is just a bunch of noise. Really just try to dial in those and make that first 90 days and into that eventual 12 months of success post-acquisition.
Makes perfect sense. And that's extremely helpful for those that are listening. Now, you haven't stopped with your first liquidity event, or I should call it major liquidity event. You've built a few more businesses, which is quite impressive. No shocker you'd become a serial entrepreneur. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what you're building today and how you've leveraged some of the learnings from the InSync build, in today's business models that you are running.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say, from a main squeeze, if you will, out of all the businesses that I'm involved with, that's Keystone Growth Advisory. And this is a full service growth firm for B2B SaaS companies. We provide go-to-market strategy, sales execution, and alternative capital. And really what we've done, you talk about the learnings from InSync, we've taken that concept of the sales engine and we've re-engineered that with the latest technology, and now we believe we have the most powerful outbound sales engine in the world. And we take that engine and we install that in companies so they can rapidly accelerate their revenue and ultimately achieve their target valuation in a fraction of the time, right? So that's the equation. It's a matter of focusing on what worked well, what our experiences have been in the trenches at InSync, and developing that and operationalizing it to where it's a repeatable process that we can plug into other companies and help these founders. So that's what we do through Keystone, and then the alternative capital is done through our customer subscription financing.
Yeah, maybe share a little bit more about what is customer subscription financing. For many of the suitors that were involved, it was quite a journey for them to unpack what that is. But after learning about, how a software company can finance their own contracts, private equity and strategics alike were quite excited about how capital efficient, that model is.
Well, it's one of those equations of necessity breeds innovation. So what were the challenges that I was faced with, InSync was faced with as a whole? Well, we had great cash flow through financing perpetual license, but we needed to figure out how do we get this into a true subscription-based revenue line, obviously from a valuation standpoint, long-term growth, et cetera. But we can't sacrifice the short-term cash flow, right? So what I did is I went back to the financing partners that we were using to finance these perpetual licenses and said, hey, if I could sell a 3-year software subscription, could you pay me up front and collect the monthly payments directly from the customers? And you take a cut and that just comes out of our end on a blind discount. So, well, I don't know. We've never done that before, but sure, let's give it a college try. So, through a lot of, trial and error, we ended up figuring out how to pre-fund multi-year subscriptions. Our customer got a monthly payment. We got paid all 3 years up front, and we absolved ourselves of the collections risk because it was non-recourse and the financing partner took the risk. It was another light bulb moment. Again, not something that we had set out to do, but it was a win-win-win. It was a win for the customer. They got an affordable monthly payment. It was a win for the vendor because we got paid all those years up front. And then again, we didn't have the collections risk. So after I exited the business, one of the first things that we did with Keystone is we operationalized that model. So we call this customer subscription financing, and it does exactly what we had done at InSync. It allows B2B SaaS companies to offer their customers a multi-year software subscription. Their customers pay a monthly payment. They get paid all 3 years, 2 or 3 years up front, and they don't have any collections risk on that. The financing partner collects that monthly payment directly through that customer. So it creates a win-win on both sides of the market. So again, that's something that we've operationalized, and it's a phenomenal form of non-dilutive capital that really drives cash flow while still giving you a subscription revenue valuation. So that's what we've done.
Couldn't agree more. That's one of the more impressive capital sources that we've seen for businesses that are trying to grow their company, but preserve equity and really
Yeah.
build toward a business that really can drive equity value over time without having to give up, shares when raising from traditional venture capital or growth equity. So it's very, very impressive creative source of capital.
Cool. We think so. Work for us.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. It's been quite the journey from, the early good old days of InSync and really just you building that early lead gen to BDR program to really what became the, Qualifacts and InSync model backed by Warburg Pincus. And, it's exciting to learn more about sort of the early vision all the way until the final handshake and really explore what it takes to reach the defining moment we call the closing call.
Yep. Yep. That's what it's all about. I mean, it's, you look back on it now and it is interesting, going back to the journey in 2017 where it started and looking at how far we came. It's just, wow, what a journey, right? And I'm sure plenty of founders or executives that are part of these journeys, they're going to feel that as well. But yeah, all comes down to the closing call. So, it was fantastic working with you and Zach through the process. Aforementioned all the things that we worked on with you guys. We built an incredible relationship and ultimately found a fantastic home through Qualifacts for the InSync team.
Well, thanks, Alex. I'm sure we're going to cross paths multiple times throughout our careers. So appreciate you taking the time to join the pod.
Sure, Shane. Good luck, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
Likewise.